Hey folks, Unsung, Mark, that's Chris.
Yep, good to be back.
New microphones.
Yeah, it's been so long. I wasn't recognising your voice anyway, but with this high-tech stuff and space-age equipment that we're now using, microphones that work, microphones that don't pick up strange static interdimensional hum. So
I like that interdimensional hum. It made me feel as though I was on another plane.
People that listen to the show won't even realise it. There'll be like a subliminal effect of a certain frequency that they associate with Unsung. And we've probably got them like via Pavlovian conditioning now, where we can just play just that tone and it evokes a certain state of dismay.
Yeah. And we've removed it by getting new microphones.
Yeah. So you won't be dismayed anymore listening to the show. You'll be uneasy. It'll be like when I had COVID and I was eating stuff and I couldn't taste it. You'll be hearing the words, but you won't be experiencing anything emotionally.
Yeah.
Be very strange.
It'll be strange.
I'll try and isolate that tone and add it back into the mix. Don't want you to miss it. Emotional content.
So it's been 2 weeks since we did a regular episode. It's only really been 1 week since we've not recorded, technically a week and a half I suppose, but it's been 2 weeks of non-content for the subscribers. Sorry guys.
There's plenty more coming down the pipeline.
There is. We've got some cool stuff lined up. What I say, a big hello to David Eval.
Evel? I'm going to say Evel.
Yeah, if we butchered your name, then you listen to Unsung, so you know this happens fairly regularly.
Well, if we butchered your name, you've now got access to the AAA Facebook group to register your complaint.
And if you don't have access to it yet, then fire us a message on Patreon and we will hook you up with the link, because it's all about Patreon, right? That's where you get it. That's where you sign up. You go to patreon.com/unsungpod. You can sign up, like Chris says, to the lowest tier of £4 a month or for whatever your local designated currency is. Get access to bonus episodes, the Facebook group, to episodes a few days early when we have them. And yeah, you can just bam us up basically, like in person.
It's been 6 years of a weekly content. I'm not going to beat myself up.
I'm neither, man.
we put out a lot of stuff in the last 2 weeks anyway.
It's 317 episodes in total. That's how many it's been.
But that's not including the bonus.
That is including.
It is including the bonus.
No, I guess on top of the bonus stuff, it's about 330 episodes. So yeah, and but last week, hopefully subs took a chance to listen to Shit You May Not Have Seen, the podcast I did with Joe McGlynn and Scott Walker, not the Scott Walker, the other Scott Walker, about the movie World's Greatest Dad, a classic film,
which we mentioned in the context of our movie soundtracks episode. But yeah, love that movie. It was really nice doing that podcast with those guys. I'm going to do another one quite soon as well.
Oh, nice, cool.
But yeah, we make the odd appearance here and there. But I'm not going to. No, you ain't get fucking any apology out of me, you motherfuckers. I had 4 days in Portugal. 4 measly fucking days in Portugal.
4 days in Portugal.
They were excellent. But it's 4 days. That's not even a full working week.
Yeah, I spent 3 days in London, so I mean, you can take it. Is that good or bad? Depends what you ask.
Yeah, it seems like you had a pretty good time watching flesh slap against flesh.
Yeah, big meaty men and women slapping meat. Yeah.
But bookending our little trips, we started and have now completed the research into a particular record that we're going to cover this week, a particular band who I think we've mentioned in passing. Who the fuck have we not mentioned in passing? Now I think about it, but we've mentioned in passing previously. That band is The Armed, and the album that we've chosen to cover is
Untitled. Which is their second album. Technically their first as The Armed, but it is their second record.
So we're back with a normal episode for this. I think we've mentioned already that we've got a couple of biggies in the pipeline as well. We're going to do a monster episode on one of the big names
one of the biggest names
in modern music next week. So stay tuned for that. We're also going to follow that soon after with an investigative journalism type episode. Mark has been, this is
reading books.
This has been fermenting into a fine wine.
Yeah.
He pitched this to me about 6 months ago, and then he's slowly been chipping away at it and getting first-hand evidence, and then we're going to assemble it into something that vaguely resembles journalism.
Yeah, it's
no spoilers. No spoilers.
I was just going to say, like, I think a lot of people listening to this podcast are aware of how sleazy the music industry is, but there are other layers to it. Unimaginably so.
I was sure you were going to say we are. I don't know. I was just already coming up with a reply. Okay, so that's going to be good. And subs, by way of an apology, since apparently that's what we need to do when we take 4 days to fucking Portugal. We are going to do Gone Too Soon with the number 2.
Number 2.
Because it's sort of Fast and the Furious. Gone Too Soon, the return, and that is with Vicky, and we are going to cover a whole list of people that we apparently missed in the original Gone Too Soon mixtape, because Vicky has made that list and shouted it at us repeatedly. I mean, to be fair, a few folk shouted stuff at us on the Triple E group,
but no one as regular as Vicky.
No, she is a regular shouter at her. So we're going to cover that, and you will get exclusive Triple E access to the mixtape part 2 Gone Too Soon.
And you will enjoy it. You will enjoy it.
You shall enjoy it. There'll be 10 more in that series. With increasingly improbable scenarios. But yeah, this week, The Armed. Untitled. Formed in Detroit, Michigan. And
2009.
2009, yeah. And for folks that might have seen their stuff about, they don't always use The Armed on the cover of their records. They have it's like a bow tie.
It's a monogram.
But it looks like a bow tie.
Yeah, it looks a bit like a bow tie, yeah.
I mean, that's an odd monogram, unless you're a bow tie.
Yeah. I think it says that, I think the monogram is The Armed, the way it can be assembled to create the full name of the band.
I mean, they could be bow ties.
It could be.
This is the thing about The Armed. We don't know what they are.
Well, we kind of know now, as of recently.
Who knows?
I mean, yeah.
We're now at that point of deep fakes where it's like The Armed have apparently revealed who they are.
We always know who their drummer is. That is a fact. We always know who their drummer is.
Yeah, that's true. So The Armed are frequently recorded by Kurt Ballou of God City Studios and the band Converge, who I recently saw in Leeds. By the way,
you could have asked him about this.
I could have, yeah. The night before I saw them, they played to between 10 and 15,000 people headlining at Art Tangent. And the night I saw them, it was a room with maybe 180 people and Kevin supporting. It was fucking brilliant.
Imagine it was devastating.
Just wanted to squeeze that in there. But yeah, Kurt Ballou recorded a lot of them. So this is some hi-fi, noisy music. It sounds fantastic.
Yeah. He could also be in the band.
Could be in the band.
I think there's a good chance that on these early records he was definitely playing on the records.
There is a fair chance. So this album is 41 minutes with 14 tracks of pretty extreme experimental hardcore. I mean, it's Converge. Really.
It's Converge and Bocce and, a bit Dillinger Escape Planning places as well.
And it was released, and this is, I think, one of the most interesting things, it was released, as have so many of the records been, for free on Bandcamp by the band themselves.
Yeah.
Now, for a band that features people of the stature that we're going to mention during this, because they have a lot of collaborators, that's pretty remarkable to release their albums for free on Bandcamp. Like, what is going on there? So, but generally, this is the thing. What is going on with the Armed?
What is going on there, yeah.
Overall, who or what is the Armed? Members are generally anonymous. A guy called Tony Volsky has done publicity recently. He was previously known as Adam Vallely. Now, I first heard about this guy through you, and one of the key things that you first told me was that he works in marketing.
Yeah, and that is his career. Obvious.
Yeah, so that's very interesting for what the Armed is in terms of the enigma factor. As we said, they have a crazy list of collaborators, and I think the list of collaborators, as word breaks and people realise, has played a big part in their success as well, because they're the kind of collaborators that you really want to check out what they're doing. I mean, one that we've talked, just randomly picking one, Chris Penny of Dillinger Escape Plan would be one, so a lot of people would just go and listen to anything he's done. They have at times apparently recruited actors to throw folks off the scent of who the members were. I mean, I'm guessing not professional actors because they're not getting any money for their album sales. But yeah, faking people out like that so that folk see them and go, oh, that's who they are. No, it's not. They announced the membership of the band on the sleeve for the album Ultra Pop, but nobody actually knew whether to believe it because they were so fucking gaslit by that point. There's a 2023 article in The Fader where they supposedly met the band's true behind the scenes leader, a guy called Dan Green with an E, and Green supposedly masterminds the music but does not actually perform in the band. But in that piece, Wolski also said, I want to be really honest with everyone this time around, claiming that the obfuscation element has run its course. But then later in The Guardian, he added further confusion by saying there is a real person whose birth certificate says Dan Green, who writes music in our band, but another person portrays Dan Green as a character in the Armed multiverse.
Which is just the most fucking obscene marketing speak I can even imagine. Like, Tony Lawski's got a website and he has definitely filmed videos for the band and directed them, and he's worked with Nike and stuff like that, so he's worked with some big brands, so I'm pretty sure he knows what he's doing. Whether or not he is actually the singer, it remains to be seen. He could be the singer now. Is it the same guy who screamed in the first 3 records? I don't fucking know, but it's interesting to ponder.
Yeah, Kurt would know.
Kurt would know, and Kurt was asked about it in 2018. Have you seen this?
No.
There's a Metal Injection article which has got 5 theories about the band from 2018, and the top theory was it's all just Kurt Ballou from Converge. And he told Noisy that when I started this band, I was thinking about a division between a band or any known entity for that matter and its audience, and how that has changed in the era of social media. With direct access, people can build close relationships within a community, but it can also create a disproportionate sense of entitlement. My idea in creating this project was to disrupt that culture by forcing people to focus only on the content, not on the creators, hoping it would usher in an era of creative culture where the work is more important than the workers. But then he would later go on to say, like, he basically denied it. He said, a few people have asked me about it. He dug up the original article, and he said journalists need to edit interviews better. He said he actually said he said to them that I produced the band, not when I created the band.
Yeah.
And he's like, I think that's brilliant. I'd like to take credit for it, but I can't. And he said, first of all, they've repeatedly booked time with me, and then at the last minute threatened to pull out of the booking unless I provided them with a drummer. That's why all of my drummer friends have been on the records.
Yeah.
At this point, I've come to expect the drummer nonsense. But for the newest record, which I guess in 2018 would have been Only Love, things went even more sideways. I engineered the drums, they did their own overdubs. Then when it came time to mix it, they went behind my back, hired Zach Weeks, another engineer that works at God City. He went into the studio at night after I was done working on the other records, used all of my gear and settings. He's like, I knew he was doing something, but Aaron booked it under a fake name. I don't know who Aaron is. He mentioned a guy called Aaron. There's never been anybody named Aaron publicly associated with a band. It could be Aaron from Sumac, I guess.
Yeah.
Because members of Sumac have played in the band.
Yeah, the drummer.
Yeah. It's deception and subversion are at the core of what the Armed does, so it really shouldn't have come as a surprise. I guess the hijinks are less fun when I'm not in on the joke. Which, I mean, that just tells you everything you need to know about the band.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
So, anonymity, why? As we mentioned, the Armed is potentially helmed by a guy who does marketing for a living, and marketing is a massive part of this entire process. But there are various reasons for other artists assuming anonymity over the years. So I wanted to use this as an opportunity to do a wee bit of a mini dive into anonymity, because we do that with the show sometimes. An album comes along that's got something about it, and we take a wee excursion into that territory. Okay, so let's look at anonymity in art. Right, and we're talking like let's get some context here, going way back. Right, so Caravaggio, Cara fucking Vaggio. So he was actually Michelangelo Merisi of the town Caravaggio, but he was a peer of a certain other Michelangelo you may have heard of, and hence wanted to try and distinguish between himself and the other. Let's see, who else have we got? An art, Banksy, obviously. And anonymity was partly essential due to the illegality of a lot of what he was doing, because he'd got busted for a lot of it. It was born of street art, but as he grew famous, it definitely helped protect him from backlash over some of the political stances, and just then became part of the mystique. And a lot of what he did, the anonymity became a feature of it. The Banksy exhibition that went on in Glasgow recently, at that. There was one brilliant little exhibition piece where he hadn't been invited to some art event that was happening, and it was like Egypt or Rome or something, I can't remember, and basically he set up a street stall as a street vendor outside it and had a bunch of pieces that he'd done, and he's sitting there at the stall outside it. I mean, his face is obscured, he's kind of obscured, but it's literally him sitting at the street stall, and that the anonymity makes that work. That wouldn't work if you were just really an artist sitting at a street stall. It would still be interesting, but it wouldn't be the same. So that's a big part of it. Another one, Felipe Pantone, or Pantone, depending on what language you're speaking, Argentinian modern artist. He says that by being anonymous, when people search for his name, all they find is his work and not his face, and that's his objective. Like, in the age of the internet, I don't want people to be obsessed by the cult of personality. I want them to be obsessed by my art, and therefore Googling Felipe Pantone, as hopefully some of the listeners will do, will just bring up his work. It won't bring him up.
You get a sense of that. That's what Kurt Ballou is. Even Kurt Ballou said that, but the other interviews, apart from the ones they've done this year, over the last couple of months, because those new albums just came out last week, they were very much about this idea of it just focusing on the art, like who it is. Apart from the drummer, it's completely irrelevant. It could be made by anybody, and you just consume it. And
except that's kind of flipped now, because it may have started like that, but it's become part of the of the shtick.
That's why I'm tend to believe them when they say that they've dropped all the guises, because from what I've read, like Perfect Saviours, on new record, is deliberately quite an ostentatious kind of rock record, quite melodic.
Put my dreams on green screen, watch me fly. Take my fill of these ambrosia nights.
Not really heavy at all, but it's all a bit of a critique on the idea of the cult of personality. So it's now playing into that, playing up to that idea of, we are now rock stars. Think of us as rock stars, accept the rock star product. But actually, that's also quite vacuous. Whether or not that is true, we'll only find out in future. But that seems to be the narrative they're spinning for this iteration or this era of the band.
Let's look at another field in literature. So there's a few famous male purveyors of pseudonyms, pen names. Mark Twain. Yep, Samuel Clemens. He also used other pen names. He had Thomas Jefferson Snodgrass, and Sergeant Fathom, which, as a guy that just came back from a minted wrestling competition, I'm sure you'd have paid to see Sergeant Fathom.
I would have, yeah.
The Deep Sea Dive.
Is that his finisher?
I think so. Yeah, we'll go for that. But Mark Twain partly did that to avoid repercussions for controversial stances and subjects in his work, because obviously, especially things like Huckleberry Finn, very racially charged at that time in the South. Another would be George Orwell. His real name was actually Eric Arthur Blair, due to concerns that some of his antics in the book Down and Out in Paris and London would actually embarrass his family. So came up with the pseudonym for that reason and then stuck with it. And another one would be Richard Bachman. Stephen King. That was kind of necessity. It was partly due to the idea that writers could only release one book a year. That was sort of a rule of the publishing industry at the time, and King was so prolific, he was writing so much stuff that he was like, I fucking need to just get more and more of this out. By the way, Bachman is actually responsible for some of the kind of best known, The Running Man, for example.
The Running Man,
There's a lot of stuff that was done under that pen name that actually went on to become really, really successful. Meanwhile, in the field of female writers, we have a few. George Eliot, his real name was Mary Ann Evans, wrote books like Middlemarch and The Mill and the Floss. Feared that she would not be taken seriously writing as a woman. Also, this was partly due to her living openly with a married man at the time, George Lewes, Lews, and they wanted to avoid more attention and potential scandal around that. So George Eliot obviously used George Lewes' first name. Currer, Ellis and Acton Bell. Any idea who they were?
No.
That is Charlotte, Emily and Anne Bronte.
Oh.
Yeah, like CEA. The original pen names for early works by the Brontes, who lived a secluded and private life in Yorkshire. Charlotte once wrote of that, we did not like to declare ourselves women because we had a vague impression that authoresses are liable to be looked on with prejudice. And another one would be A.M. Barnard, who was actually Louise May Alcott. author of Little Women. She used the pseudonym to release a whole series of much racier, daring work that might not have been deemed proper at the time. But bringing it back to what we're covering, anonymous musicians, there are a fair few categories, and actually I uncovered a really interesting piece, an interview with Beefcake the Mighty of Gwar.
Yeah. Is that the big guy who plays bass and now sings?
Aye, exactly.
He's like a proper music PhD guy.
Yeah, exactly. His name's Dr. Michael Bishop. He's a doctor in music and a speaker on the, quote, economics of identity. He's actually got a TED Talk.
The TED Talk is really good. I recommend it.
So Psychology Today did a thing called Heavy Metal Gwar and the Power of Identity. As you said, Dr. Michael Bishop became Beefcake the Mighty, and then he became Blothar when the actual singer died. But Dr. Bishop on Gwar and sublimating his identity, he said, being part of such a strong community inevitably comes with sacrifice of one's own personal identity. In the end, everybody is serving this one central goal, and everybody agrees that the most important thing is pushing this thing forward. And we do that by all sharing a sense of identity. The relationship between personal identity and collective identity is bi-directional. Just as individuals need to sacrifice for the collective only survives through the ongoing investment of the individuals. Fans love to say Gwar can last a million years because you just get these different people to put the suits on. That's not true. It's going to last as long as the people who are involved in it continue to love each other and are willing to and feel as if they all understand one another and are able to articulate that sense of group identity through a creative output. And he added, and that turns out to be very resilient, but at the same time it's also very fragile. The level of sacrifice of identity or sacrifice of individualism gets pretty extreme. In 1993, Peter Lee of that band was shot, and Bishop says the collective identity approach of the band made that harder to process. Quote, his personal identity was being harmed by the collective identity and the values of the band. The members of Gwar were known to close fans, especially as so many had played in bands out with Gwar, but to the general public they were not. And the suits, a bit like that band Lordi, also allowed character swaps. For example, when the original Brocky died, Dr. Bishop took over his role as vocalist. There's a bit of the Wayne Statics to that as well right now. Wayne Static, who passed away, and now Static X perform with this Wayne bot.
A guy for dope, yeah.
Yeah, a guy for dope. And he wears like a Wayne Static-esque robot mask thing. It reminds me, I think I've said this before, of the robot Ussies from Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. Yeah.
I don't really like Static X, but I think that's a cool way to honour someone's legacy and memory as being, because it was his band. He formed the band, he wrote all the songs.
Yeah, it's an interesting approach. So there's some pretty high profile and less high profile examples. A really big one to start with would be the Residents.
Residents, yeah.
So probably the best example is, I think, over a duration, they've had 60 albums since 1974. They've been totally anonymous since the 70s. They did 7 world tours in character. You know, they're a band that I'd imagine we'll probably end up covering at some point. I think Ferruccio was a fan of them. Was always verging more on art project than a simple band. They had, for example, these big fuck off eyeball helmets and top hats and tails. You're bound to have seen it at some point. They remained silent in public appearances. A guy called Hardy Fox, who's actually since passed away, outed himself as a founder member in 2017. At one point, lots of folk were convinced that the band were, believe it or not, the Beatles. Do you know about this?
Yeah, I've heard about that.
Yeah. Other folks like Les Claypool and Gerard Casale of Devo were accused of being members, were named as being members, but not actually. Also, Mark Mothersbaugh is supposed to have played guest keys with them on a tour. I think that actually did happen, that he stepped in. They have this cryptic corporation management group who do interviews on their behalf. And the remaining 3 members of that manager group, so Hardy Fox was one of them, but the remaining 3 deny being band members. But I think a lot of people think that's kind of bullshit, that there's a huge crossover between Cryptic Corporation and the Residents themselves. But they've maintained that this long. Another one, which to an extent would have been Slipknot, for a long time.
For a long
Certainly
time.
when they first came out, people eventually learned who they were. But for example, the newest member in the band, Tortilla Man, only confirmed his identity as a guy called Michael Pfaff in 2020.
Well, there's a new member. The guy that did the samples and stuff. I want to say Craig Wilson. He left recently. He's been replaced by somebody else, and nobody's quite sure who that person is.
Right. Here's an interesting one. A Saudi black metal band called Al Namrud. Heard of them? They basically remain anonymous to avoid persecution by the Saudi authorities. It's just fucking fascinating. And it is the most hardcore example here. One that we've covered in the past would be Goat, Swedish, Swedish psych band. They've got one member, Christian Johansson, that's known, and the rest are anonymous. A big one here, Ghost.
Ghost, of course, yeah.
So Ghost is kind of the project, a guy called Tobias Forge. He's like the project leader, and he's like the main character. And
Papa Emeritus,
Papa Emeritus 2, Leviathan, Copromancer. They changed the main character from album to album to give it different feels and different themes. The band themselves are known as the Nameless Ghouls. There's individual examples here. He Who Cannot Be Named, he was a member of the Dwarves who actually faked his own death and used fucking all kinds of crazy press leaks and stuff to fuel the notoriety around the band. Have you heard of the Burqa Boys?
No.
Fuck me, man, you gotta look these guys up. They're like very edgelordy, okay. Their location for the band is listed as Tripoli in Libya. Their merch is kind of funny. They've got like pink cassettes, and then they've got like black t-shirts, like the flag of the Islamic State and stuff. It's all quite satirical. Portal, an Australian extreme metal band. Singer The Curator wears different hats and headgear from album to album based on the theme. The lead guitarist, Horror Elogium, apparently has a real name Chris. The rest of the band have suits and executioner roles with face coverings. They go for a big cinematic vibe, and they try to be genuinely frightening. It's not like Gwar or even Ghost, which is kind of camp. It tries to be genuinely quite intense. They based the costumes for that on the silent movie era as well, which is quite cool. The anonymous status, I think, really lends itself to the intimidation factor of Portal. They even do their interviews in character. A band called People Mover, PPL MVR. Heard of this?
I've heard of the name.
Right, so basically they're a trio that play in these fucking weird ape-like suits, and for ages a theory kicked about that it was a band brand new in disguise, but that's later been dismissed. Gwar, we've already mentioned. Lordi. I mentioned in reference to Gwar, members of the band supposedly changed numerous times with Lordi, but it's just Mr. Lordi and the guitarist Amen who are still the originals, but because of the big fuck off suits, they can swap about the backing musicians and maintain continuity.
I've got a couple of you might not have, I don't know.
Well, throw them in, I'll tell you.
Sleep Token.
Yep, I have Sleep Token. touted as worshippers of sleep. The
Yeah.
fucking press releases for this band, by the way. The mortal representatives of the ancient deity known only as sleep, led by the masked and cloaked figure appointed vessel. Fuck me, the master creator behind the music.
Some people have speculated the singer is Chris Martin from Coldplay.
That would be fabulous.
That would be fabulous.
Definitely not.
I mean, it could be because the band are dull as fuck.
Oh, well, so the press release though makes up for it. It goes on, he is everywhere at all times. Vessel encountered sleep in a dream with promise of glory and magnificence if Vessel followed him with an H. I'm going to say that sleep maybe lied to Vessel because they are not glorious or magnificent. So the only listed members are Vessel and I think it's 2, but it could be IL or it could be LL. I'm guessing it's Roman numerals for 2. They're a London-based arty metallic project, stylistically kind of varied, always remained anonymous and only ever did one interview, but clearly the gimmick has massively contributed to coverage and sales and notoriety. The music's sort of like a beginner's version of Meshuggah mixed with some kind of naff Tool meets like auto-tuned goth pop.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, and the pianos and this corny sort of OTT metallic balladry, cheesy as fuck, totally uninspiring.
Yeah, I know a few people who listen to this podcast that like them, and they're just totally not for me, man. I find them quite uninspired as well.
Yeah. Another one that I've got here, Torture, the French black metal band. You know them?
No.
So they were part of the Les Légions Noires movement in Brittany. That whole movement was basically an attempt to replicate the black metal inner circle in Norway. And it was inspired by all the fucking usual douchebags. And Torture have got this whole shtick about hastening in the quote Black Holocaust, which sounds as problematic as it probably is. And
What, you chuck in the Network?
tell me about it.
The Network is basically Green Day. It's like a sort of futuristic sound project. Wear masks and use aliases such as Fink and Van Gogh and The Snoo.
The Snoo.
Whenever they've been interviewed, they've always denied any connection to Green Day, and they claim to be from Germany. They've even got a whole fictional backstory and a secret society and a conspiracy theory. And their first album was called Money 2020, and then they released an album 2020, which basically was like, we told you we were coming back. It's basically Green Day with a couple of extra members.
How do you know it's Green Day though?
Because it's obviously Green Day. It's quite obviously Green Day. You can't not sound like Billy Joe Armstrong, do you know what I mean?
Jinx.
But yeah, it's fun. It's a fun thing that they do. But they've had a couple of other projects where they've had different identities and stuff like that. Foxborough Hot Tubs is another one, where they basically just played like garage rock music and did an album and stuff. So they occasionally pop up with a completely different identity and just say we're not Green Day, even though it's very clearly Green Day.
That's mad. A Russian one here, Ia. Now, EA, I'm guessing it's not in the game, but they're a doom band for Russia who write in Akkadian, the language of ancient Mesopotamia. If you've ever seen Ghostbusters, that'll probably mean something to you.
That's a hell of a thing though, isn't it?
Yeah. Another Russian one, Dvar, DVAR. Russian Darkwave, who dedicate all their work to a bee entity called Dvar, and who write exclusively in an ancient occult language called Enochian.
Sweet.
A bit lighter in tone, Masked Intruder.
Whatever we want, whenever. Two lovers against the law, living on a prayer we don't get caught. So come on.
Yeah, Master. Well, yeah. Actually, I don't know if you're doing more podcast and really funny story, man. I interviewed their guitar player, Green.
Right, so the members are red, yellow, blue, green, black, and I think there was a purple who guested on bass for one tour.
Yeah, it was a female player, and they're accompanied by a cop as well. I think it's Officer Bradford, who basically just is like the pit commander and dances about on stage and all that. It's fucking mental. But I interviewed Green, and he did it completely in character, right, with his mascot. It's like balaclava on and everything, and like the whole story of the band is like they wear their hearts to the sleeves, and they're always singing about their broken hearts and their sort of their love for like this unattainable girl. It's like very cheesy sort of late 70s kind of Ramones style pop punk with harmonies to boot. It's definitely of a different era, but they've all went to prison for like basically stealing shit, and their gimmick online for a long time and their social media was about how they would come to your town and just steal stuff. He did this whole interview in character and just talking about how much he's stolen shit and all that, and then as soon as I turned the fucking recorder off, man, he just pulled this balaclava right off, and he's like, man, I was so fucking hot in there. So I go into the venue and I stand at the bar and I see this guy wearing it's an Orange County Drums t-shirt, and I know the band have got an Orange County Drums drum kit. It's this tall guy, he's got blonde hair, he's probably American. I started speaking to him, and I go, hey man, are you in the band? And he's like, I'm with the band. For him it was obviously like a thing that he was playing down. I was supposed to interview the singer, but he was feeling unwell, so he didn't really want to do it and fuck it by putting any pressure on his voice or whatever. So that's why the guitar player did it. The singer then came out and stood next to the drummer, and he looked at me and he's like, man, I'm so sorry I couldn't do the interview. That was Listen to Their Blue, the singer. I could tell straight away it was him because he wears the same kind of like really thick black glasses. And he wears them when he's not singing, when he's just not in his mask. And the drummer's face just went, oh.
You blew it again.
And I ended up standing chatting to him for ages, and they were really, really lovely guys, but like it was just mad. I'd never been close to anybody that was like in character, and then just immediately as soon as all recording equipment was off, like switched on a dime to being a completely different person.
Was that at our venue?
I was in the 13th Knot.
Alright, because it
was before that gig.
Here's an interesting one. Rubber Bandits. Irish band featuring Blind Boy Boat Club, Mr. Bobby Chrome, and DJ Willie O'DJ. It's a fucking great name. They wear plastic bags on their heads, describe themselves as artists in a movement known as gas cuntism or Dolku Dada. Blind Boy's actually now got a really successful podcast.
I've seen that, yeah.
Vicky's a really big fan of it. She totally raves about it. Another one that's maybe on a twist on the theme, Gorillaz.
I've got Gorillaz here as well. Yeah,
a virtual band. Actually, when I was reading about Gorillaz, it was quite interesting. They were helmed, obviously, by Damon Albarn and an artist called Jamie Hewlett, and the other cartoon character members in it are 2D, Murdoch, Noodle and Russell. But the idea started back in 1997. Apparently it was like Damon Albarn and I think actually, and this guy Jamie Hewlett shared the flat despite the fact they didn't really get on, and that Jamie Hewlett had gone out with Damon Albarn's ex-girlfriend or something like that. But they were sitting mute, like I don't know if they were high or something like that, watching MTV, and so that the band idea sprang up as a response to the vapid hell of MTV. They talked about it being a mid-sea manufactured bands, and so they were also trying to manufacture something but make it quite unorthodox. The group was originally called Gorilla, and the track On Your Own by Blur apparently started as a Gorillaz tune.
Oh, that's cool. Jamie Hewlett used to be, I don't know if he still is, but used to be an illustrator for 2000 AD.
Yeah, well, he created Tank Girl along with, I can't remember the other guy who actually created Tank Girl, but that's where the art style came from as well for Gorillaz.
I seem to remember when it first came out, it was anonymous, even though it was very clearly Damon Albarn's voice, but there was the press, all the interviews. I could be wrong because my memory's foggy, but I think all the interviews were done in character as the
the animated characters. They used software so that when they spoke, the characters would talk along in an animated form.
But they've since dropped all that. Like the characters are like avatars, but they're like everybody knows it's Damon Albarn and Jamie Hewitt and a bunch of collaborators.
Yeah, I can't remember the drummer's name, but he became an official full member at some point as well because he'd been doing Russell for so long. I mean, a lot of the band's work, especially early on, involved collaboration. So Dan the Automator and D12. So having it anonymous of sorts really helped as well because they couldn't tour it, or at least they couldn't tour it in that form, so it gave it a wee bit of flexibility where that was concerned. Here's an individual one, Buckethead, yeah. Real name's Brian Carroll.
Apparently he's a really weird guy.
You are joking. He wears a KFC bucket in his head and he's a weird guy. He has been on literally hundreds and hundreds of albums. It is fucking mental. But the guy, when is it time to eat?
Do you know the story about him being in Guns N' Roses and recording his guitar parts for Chinese Democracy? I think I might have told this in the podcast before.
It rings a bell.
Basically, he wanted to have a shed full of chickens in the studio, and he wanted to record his guitar parts inside this shed full of chickens. Yeah, and the chickens were just shitting everywhere. And apparently the smell was really bad, but they offered to clean it out and all that. And he's like, no, the smell makes me play better and stuff like that. Like,
that is fucking. I mean, that's a fucking troll, innit? Like that's like.
But apparently he does weird shit like that all the time. So I think the reason anonymous is because he might actually be like a really strange person. He just doesn't want to be around people. You know, I think it might be a kind of protection for him and the people that he works with.
I kind of like that sort of reminds me of the Brown M&Ms thing though, where it's just sort of like, if I ask for this, will they do it? It's so outlandish.
I mean, if it gets Guns N' Roses and you're playing Guns N' Roses, you would ask for the most ridiculous fucking thing, wouldn't you?
Yeah, exactly.
But apparently he's an odd one though. Apparently he's an odd guy.
Never seen that coming, Mark.
One more we need to chuck in. United Nations.
Yeah, who we've covered.
Done a podcast on them. Go back and listen to it. It's Jeff Brickley from Thursday and various other members from various other bands. I'm wondering if there might be an influence on this project.
Yeah, you would think they maybe did, yeah. Zombie, English electronic musician and producer. He's on Ninja Tune, you know, pretty well regarded. Obvious one, Daft Punk, who were kind of anonymous for a long time. Thomas Bangalter and Guy Manuel de Homem Cristo. I remember when we did the Daft Punk episode, how fucking funny that name was. They were in a band called Darlin' and didn't really take off to anything like the same extent. The early Daft Punk stuff, they used the masks and anonymity seemed to increase interest in the early output. They've said, quote, "We're not performers, we're not models, it would not be enjoyable for humanity to see our features, but the robots are exciting to people." It definitely gave them the edge with some of that early stuff that they brought out. Another one, Deadmau5, a guy called Joel Zimmerman, got the idea for the helmet from his pal Jay Gordon of the band Orgy.
Fucking Orgy, mate.
There you go. Orgy gave Deadmau5 the design
band, yeah.
Who saw that? There's a nexus. That's a great nexus. Yeah. Another one related to that, Marshmello.
Yeah.
So Christopher Comstock, big fuck off marshmallow head thing with X'd out eyes, is basically a rip off of Deadmau5, and indeed Deadmau5 has passed copious comment on that fact. Outed by Forbes magazine in 2017, the real identity. For a while, thanks to a cheeky tweet, people thought that Deadmau5 had been Marshmello the whole time. The two had this running spat though, but for a while people thought it might have all been a work, you know. And then what? Last one, Mark, one we've done before, MF Doom.
Sometimes he rhyme quick, sometimes he rhyme slow, or vice versa. Whip up a slice of nice verse pie, hit it on the first try. Villain, the worst guy. Spot hot tracks like spot a pair of fat asses. Shots of the scotch from out the square shot glasses. And he won't stop.
Pseudo-anonymous, right?
So a nice way to be able to send somebody out on tour when you can't be arsed.
Yeah.
Stick the mask on.
Which the Armed may very well have done. I saw them live in 2018 in the Hug and Pint, and they had the ghillie suit guy in the command in the pit and causing complete fucking chaos in the venue. It was brilliant. But they played in front of like blinding white lights, so they could have not been playing. They could have not even been the actual band.
Yeah,
It could have been a backing track for all we know. And Simon Neil was at that show. He smells very nice, that man.
He's probably got some nice cologne.
Yeah,
Was he
lovely guy as well.
Was he shut off?
No. He kept his jacket on as well.
I don't think that was the real Simon Neil. I think we're talking about a lot of imposters here.
I spoke to him for a little bit. Everybody was coming over and taking photos of him with him after the show, which I thought was a bit shitty.
Of course.
But I was chatting to him and he was like, man, I fucking love this band. They're so good. I don't think he was expecting it to be as close as it was in that room, because he was standing right at the back next to the toilets with his pals.
Best place for him.
Yeah.
So yeah, history of anonymity in music. If you can think of any others that we've missed, a bit like Vicky, shout them at us on the internet. Hook us up with any that we overlooked. We would do a quick run through the discography. We'll make it nice and quick. You mentioned These Are Lights with 2009, recorded by Balu, debut album released for free. Wolski said, wanting people to actually hear the music made us give it away for free. We've all played in other bands for a while now, and whether it is good or not, it's undeniable that for the most part young people do not place the same sense of monetary value on recordings as they once did. People can argue about the ethics, but that is the fact.
Yeah. It's a good record. But this was released under their original name, Dicer Slicer. That's why you can't find it under the Armed on Spotify, but you can find it on YouTube. I hadn't actually heard it because I didn't know it existed until doing the research for this podcast. I thought Untitled was their first album. It was exactly what I was expecting when I knew who was involved with it, which is Nick, I can't even say his surname, the drummer from Baptists, and Kurt Ballou. Some highlights for me: Party at Palos is fucking furious. It's got a really brutal ending. Proper metalcore, hardcore vibe. King Breaker's got a mathcore feel to it. There's Hail Troglodon. Brings in synths, which is kind of pretending to some of the things he would continue to do as he would go down the line. Is
it synths or is it synth pedals?
Who knows with this band?
Yeah, because definitely there are moments of synth pedals and stuff we're going to cover.
Definitely has synths. It's got horns as well. It's really jazzy and it's kind of dissonant. On their early records they do that. They'll have like furious like mathcore or metalcore, and they'll break up the record with like an instrumental track or like a kind of loungy jazzy thing. I think it's a really good record. I think it's probably not really of a piece with the rest of the stuff. I don't think that they've later gone to do. I think Untitled stands apart from it, and it's probably more of a piece with the vision that maybe Adam/Tony had for the band, and Dan, whoever he is.
Somebody had for the band. They did a Common Enemies EP in 2010 that featured Chris Penny, a Dillinger Escape Plan.
He's on 3 EPs. He's on that. He's on Young and Beautiful, which came out the year after, then Spreading Joy, which came out the year after that as well. Common Enemies is fine. It's a bit of a continuation, I think. Young and Beautiful is really good. There's a song called Pushing Daisies on it, which has got like a death and roll vibe to it. Kind of Every Time I Die in places, kind of southern rock meets metalcore. And then there's a song at the end called You Have Died, which sounds like Every Time I Die playing Dillinger Escape Plan, which is really nice. Spreading Joy is the angriest fucking thing they have ever done. and Chris Penny absolutely smashes it on it. His drum is phenomenal. It sounds like Trap Them. It sounds like a Kurt Ballou record, like more than any other thing they've done. And I love that EP. I think it's genuinely brilliant.
So 2015 is Untitled. We'll come back to that in a bit more detail. As you said, it features the drummer Nick Yakishin, I think his name is pronounced as, who was also in
Sumac,
yes,
and played for Russian Circles as well for a bit.
In 2018 they brought out Only Love, again recorded by Kurt Ballou, also free on Bandcamp. The label was No Rest Until Ruin. Was that their own?
I think it's their own label.
Yeah. Features Ben Collar, this album. This is interesting because he says he was sort of conned into playing in it because his mates in Converge, Kurt and Jacob, Jacob's also collaborated with this band, sent him demos saying they were Converge demos.
I've heard this story.
Yeah. And the album recording was actually taking place in the midst of a Converge album recording. I think it was, what album would that have been? All We Love, We Leave Behind.
No, it would have been probably the last one.
But yeah, he was also convinced to play after he was told that Robert Trujillo would be on it, which he's
not.
Clearly never was.
Oh, was he? No, I don't think he was.
Never even mooted to be on it. It was just a way to fucking cheat him into doing it.
What did you think? 'Cause I thought you might like parts of that.
It's alright.
Quite noisy in places.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting amalgam. I think I want to look at the trajectory of the band in more of a meta sense once we get to the end here, because there's a consistent movement, a migration,
definitely
sonically. Yeah,
you can hear it. Like, you can definitely hear the more synths coming in this record, and they also move towards the black gazy kind of sound, which they experiment a bit more with in ultra pop. Some things which I think you might want to check out from this record. Witness, really noisy, loads of loud keys, very oppressive, almost black metal in places. Nowhere to Be Found has some really freaky synths and some cool vocals which are buried quite deep in the mix. Fortune's Daughter has the appearance of, I believe, what's her name, Cara Droshagen, who is the female vocalist in the band. She first pops up in Untitled, but her vocal isn't as loud as it is in this song, and it's pretty cool. It's a lot more punky. Sounds a bit like Atari Teenage Riot, actually. I think Luxury Themes is epic. It hints at pop, but it's got a real symphonic feel with the synths. Total ripper, really aggro and in your face, but also epic. It's a kind of a paradoxical song. Middle Homes, again, hints towards pop vibes with a vocal. And again, like you say, there is definitely a trajectory which they keep touching on and moving away from, and touching on and moving away from, in every record up until the latest one, I think.
Well, Ultra Pop, you mentioned, this actually came out in Sargent House. It was co-produced by this Dan Green fella and Ben Chisholm. Executive producer on this was Kurt Ballou. It's described as maximalist experimental pop. There's wee hints of noise rock on it as well. Kerrang covered it, a guy called Tim Morton stated, quote, "It's addictive to see where the record goes next. While most hardcore bands are adamant about getting heavier, the Armed are going poppier and ultimately weirder." Robin Ferris, in his article in Line of Best Fit about it, criticised the quality of the production on this one though. The 12th track in it, The Music Becomes a Skull, features Mark Lanigan.
It's a really good song, man.
It's a mad collaboration. That was a year before Lanigan's death. You can certainly hear the development, the transition, and so I think it makes the arrival point in August of this year less of a leap. As you mentioned, the new album just came out. But if you were, for example, to play this album right after you played Untitled, I think it'd be pretty fucking jarring in terms of where they've gone. So yeah, Perfect Saviours came out just a week or so ago. It was released again by Sargent House. Iggy Pop appears in the video for the first single, Sport of Form, As God. As
God, yeah.
Julian Baker performs on a single, member of Boy Genius. Is that right? Alongside Phoebe Bridgers. The second single, I think it was Everything's Glitter. So here's the thing, in terms of trajectory. At this point, I get strong health vibes from the band, right? Because you've got this manic, noisy, screamo, hardcore start that is slowly evolving into this weird, hyper-produced alternative pop, basically. And I think there's maybe an aspirational aspect to it. This record was mixed by Alan Mulder, so that's like Nine Inch Nails, Marilyn Manson, Smashing Pumpkins, Korn, Interpol, Perfect Circle, The Killers, and actually there is a bit of all of those bands
definitely.
In this record.
His voice, singing voice, is the same register as the guy for the Killers, whose name has completely escaped me for some reason right now.
Cheesy McWhiteteeth.
Aye, the guy, the Mormon dude.
Did you see him performing with Elton John?
I did not.
It was a fucking animated Kendall. It was extremely fucking strange.
But I think you're like the industrial things like Nine Inch Nails, Marilyn Manson, A Perfect Circle, all that kind of thing. Like you can hear that in the new stuff a lot. It comes in places.
Yeah, definitely. There's so much in terms of Nine Inch Nails production style as well.
But there's actually a known list of collaborators for this record, which is really interesting. Do you know
it's fucking massive?
It's huge, man. Yeah, you've got Brian Aitken, who's in a band called Laser Wolf. We've got Eric Avery and is it Stephen Perkins from Jane's Addiction. You're on it.
I mean, that is a really surprising collaboration though. I'm not saying everybody has to sound like their main band, but Jane's fucking Addiction, fucking bongos, you know.
Totally, yeah. Jacob Bannon does some vocals on it. It's got Mark Giuliano on it, who's a Grammy nominated drummer who's played with David Bowie. He's a jazz drummer.
That's right. That he's like a massive session drummer for loads of famous people.
Urian Hackney is now the proper drummer. His dad was in Death. Rough Francis is the band that he plays drums
Death,
in.
the Chuck Schuldiner Death, not the cool,
no, that one,
proto-punk band.
Cool proto-punk band, yeah.
He was in proto-punk band.
Yeah.
Roll yourself another stick of brass. Step on the inside and move your ass.
Did you not know
this? Yes, he was. We covered that in the fucking episode. Right, so not the Chuck Schuldiner band, the proto-punk band.
Yeah,
right.
Josh Klinghoffer, formerly of Red Hot Chili Peppers, Justin Meldal Johnson.
You hate names.
The guy who's played with Beck, Paramore, and Nine Inch Nails is a bass player. Matt Sweeney, he's on it. Who's played with Zwan, Troy Van Leeuwen as well.
Queens of the Stone Age, yeah.
Zach Weeks, who is a producer, but also guitar player. I think he maybe plays in Sumac or Russian Circles or something like that. Yeah, so there's quite a list of collaborators.
And that's the thing though, right? So the marketing aspect is not lost on the Armed and Dan Green and whoever is involved here. You know, getting that list of collaborators alone brings so many scenesters and cool kind of music geeks, you know, to the party. So many people want to check this band out. It's enigmatic, but then also it's got this amazing list, this crew involved in it. It's the same reason I looked at that Midnight Masses album that we covered recently. Like it was like, wow, look at the collaborators in this album. I want to hear this. You know, that's a big part of it. I mean, in terms of the actual sound, the first track, Sport of Measure.
I'll just go out and stare at the sky. Put my dreams on green screen, watch me fly.
take my fill.
Somewhere between the Walkman and Deftones, there's a
Deftones vibe to that, I think,
I mean, there's a languid approach to the vocals that really reminds me of the Walkman, but yeah, it's got that ultra produced shoegaze metal thing of Deftones.
The keys are nice in that, I think.
The second tune, FK World.
Yeah, it's a big pop rock song, basically. It sounds like Muse.
Yeah, no, you know who it sounds like? It sounds like My Vitriol. Right, and it's got bits of Billy Corgan in it, loads of the Billy Corgan School of Songwriting in it. The third track, what's that one called again?
Clones.
Clone.
Clone. Just Clone.
I mean, that song, for folks that are from Glasgow, is a shining example of how a band like United Fruit might have sounded with a proper budget and a studio behind them. I can really hear elements as well of the Trail of Dead's sort of experimental pop and a bit of that grandiosity emerging. There is a question that arises, at what point has a project drifted so far that you might consider a rebrand? I think rebrand being the word when we're talking about a guy that does marketing. That you've got the benefits of the established rep and the brand recognisability. I get that, but it's set against that sort of, you're constantly annoying established fans by increasingly straying from what perhaps they loved most in the first place. There's got to be a kind of offset factor there.
I mean, yeah, I see what you're saying with that, and I think as fans of bands who have went through changes, quite drastic changes from album to album, and we've fallen out with them or are going to love them more, I think this kind of thing, this kind of change from record to record is built into the Armed, and it's probably an appeal for a lot of people.
Yeah, maybe.
And I think that's...
But it is, as I say about Health, it is a sort of a real drift. You're going from being basically an extreme hardcore band to being some sort of super produced industrial.
They've done it slowly though, from record to record.
Only got 5 albums though.
Yeah, but I mean, Health had 3, and then they became a fucking industrial dance band.
Yeah, I mean, I still think it's quite a steep curve, honestly. I mean, it remains to be seen how this record ages. For obvious reasons, I've only just spent time with it, given that it's only about fucking week and a bit old.
Came out on Friday.
Yeah, looking at the reviews, so 7.8 in Pitchfork. That's a pretty warm welcome. 4 out of 5 in the NME. They called it forward thinking. 5 stars in New Noise. I just would ask the question, are these on merit? I don't know. I feel like the Armed, via their shtick and their shift in musical approach, have kind of got journalists so tangled up in the meta concept and the irony of the whole thing, as well as maybe slightly bludgeoned by the glowing guest list and the hip credentials that go along with it, that the journalists are maybe a bit too discombobulated to appraise what I think is an okay bunch of songs on their own merit. I'm not convinced that as a collection this ages all that well. I think it really rides a wave of very confusing hip publicity and a very clever marketing strategy behind this band. I'm not saying it was totally intentional from the start, but it seems like the press doesn't know what to do with them. I think the journalists are actually a little bit too scared of the accusation of not getting it. Lol, you took the album seriously, oh my god. There's a sort of post-ironic thing going on there where nobody wants to criticise it because it almost makes you look like you care. Fucking imagine caring.
Well, I mean, and then in the interview with The Guardian that they did in July, he basically said that they wanted to be more transparent and honest with their fans and collaborators on this record.
But that could all be bullshit.
It could be bullshit, yeah. I mean, they also say that the mystery, the anonymity thing was never a mystery, it was just a fun thing to play with. But now they just want to create a band which is not bound by genres, but it actually represents the people that are in it.
But it's the boy that cried wolf, because they did that thing where they said that they came out and this is what we did, and then they recanted on it again. You can't constantly do that and have it not become just an intrinsic part of the band that nobody can believe a fucking word that comes out your mouth. By the way, I'm not saying that in any way undermines the music. I'm just saying in terms of marketing strategies, at what point do they come out and go, no, really, we're being honest this time, and then everybody's waiting for the other shoe to drop?
But there's also, I think that is fair, but I think it's possible for journalists and reviewers and all that to appreciate and like that aspect of it, and that helps inform their enjoyment of the record and the music as well. I think the whole thing's quite meta, and it's
very meta.
That's a meta way of looking at it. They might enjoy it for both aspects of it because it play maybe that person. I like the meta aspect of it. I'm not entirely sure if I like this record as much as I like some of their other records.
Well, this is kind of my point. I am not maligning the music here. What I'm saying, actually, the whole thing is interesting, and thank fuck for something interesting, because so much stuff isn't interesting. I'm just being a wee bit devil's advocate in terms of the marketing strategy and trying to come clean, but then you've already came clean before supposedly, and then it turned out that was a head fuck anyway. I do think there is some truth though to the fact that the reaction from the press to this record, the reviews that it's a okay record. It's pretty decent, but it's not 5 out of 5. Like, there seems to be, I just think the writers are a little bit tangled up in not knowing which way is up, because as we've said, the fucking fantastic Pitchfork double episode that we did, there is a sense of these reviews are often trying to guess the reaction of the public so that you're on the right side of it. It's not necessarily about being honest and brave and giving something a bad review that everybody else likes or whatever. There's a lot of this trying to guess, try to take a read of the room, get the temperature, and then make sure that your review seems like you're totally on message with the general consensus. And I just think the writers about this band don't really fucking know what to make of them.
Or maybe they do, and they get it and they enjoy that, and that's why they
love it. Maybe they love it. There's something about those reviews that as I said, I don't get the feeling that it's going to age as well as some of their other stuff, which seems more merit based.
I do agree. I think it's hard to say if this record is good for me just now or not. They've spent more time with it. Maybe they like it. Maybe the reviews are a bit facile. Maybe they are a bit accepting the Kool-Aid they've been given and willfully drinking it and thinking this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. I think maybe having all the collaborators on it is a bit try to dazzle you with the shiny. Yeah. But it remains to be seen if it'll work out in their favour in the end. But the meta commentary aspect of the record, I quite like that. It goes back to what Kirk Ballou originally said back in 2018, so clearly that thought of like the internet age and passive relationships to music and art has been something which has been a part of their art from the beginning. Been able to do it on a bigger stage, why the fuck wouldn't you just give it a shot, right? Why wouldn't you just, if you were on a good label and you could go, let's try and be a rock band for once and see what happens, I'd go for it, man. One thing I want to kind of come back to a little bit is the anonymity thing, because there was never a big thing made about the anonymity back when Untitled came out, because they were still doing interviews, and they were doing interviews just as these other characters. Do you know what I mean? I don't remember the people that I know that liked the band back during Untitled and Only Love were never talking about the fact we don't know who they are. That was never really in the conversation very much until Only Love, and people were like, hang on, they're telling us something different now. The story's now different. Why is it different from the last record? What's going on? And people realising, oh shit, we're getting played a little bit here. But when Untitled came out, there was never really a lot around that anonymity aspect. That seemed to be something which grew arms and legs over time. So my first interaction with the band never had any. I didn't know they're anonymous until Ultra Pop came out, because I didn't really like Only Love when it came out, so I kind of fell away from them. And I got back into them with Ultra Pop, and I was realising, then that's when I realised, like, oh, that was actually a thing. You know what I mean?
And so I think that's really interesting, because as a result, Untitled got a fairly objective hearing. It was just an album by a band, and we didn't really know there was an entire work and an entire angle and all these like super cool collaborations and stuff. And that's what I mean, it's something different. There's something a bit more honest about the reactions to it, and the fact that it still has listenability now, whereas I'm not convinced in the long-term listenability of this one. I think it'll be okay. I think it'll just be a little bit mid-table.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? So let's talk about Untitled. I mean, first of all, the cover of it makes me feel a bit weird.
I think it's great.
Right, so the cover is like a kind of weird parody of David Bowie's Aladdin Sane.
It's like Aladdin Sane middle-aged.
Yeah. I just think it's strange to blow the cover of your album on a gag. You know what I mean? It's like this is their first album as this band, their second album, and it's a gag. It's like a dumb gag, and it has got a sort of Gen X vibe about it. You know, the bands back in the 90s would do these really daft, redundant, stupid covers to basically prove how little of a shit they gave. That was part of that whole Gen X slacker thing. Imagine caring, man. And you know, and I'm guessing that in a lot of ways that's a little bit of clever branding, because the cover of this looks incredibly nonchalant. It implies nonchalance, and nonchalant people are cool because they don't care if you don't like them. And in fact, if you don't like them, it proves that you care. And again, oh my god, lol, imagine caring caring about stuff. So
There's also
I suppose I don't get it, but also I don't relate to it because I feel like an album cover is a really exciting opportunity to do something, and it just seems like a dumb gag.
I think it's a deliberate misdirect. You don't look at that and go, that's a hardcore band, that's a metalcore band.
It's very much a misdirect. You don't look at it and know what the fuck is going on.
And that's probably part of the vibe. Because the Armed, or the name, you kind of think, it's probably going to be, it's definitely going to be a rock band of some kind, right? The Armed, unlikely to be.
Have you ever tossed about ideas for album covers?
Yeah,
like, how the fuck did that get agreed on?
That is interesting.
Yeah.
That's a marketing person trying to do something different, I think.
Exactly.
100%.
That's my point. There's a thought process behind that. What does this say about us? That nonchalant, you know what it reminds me a bit of? Vice magazine. And it would have come out not too long after that kind of era where Vice magazine was doing these daft, nonchalant, fucking throwaway, gimmicky things, In terms of the tunes, you want to go through them, man?
Future Drugs.
Fucking Dillinger Escape Plan opening. It's a very furious tune.
It's an upgrade from the last album, I think, in some ways. It's still abrasive, still angry, but there's a bit more musicality to it. It feels a bit less Dillinger Escape Plan-y. Well, a lot of the things, if you do some of the reviews of this record, they make some of the comparisons they make to Dillinger Escape Plan is it's like when Dillinger Escape Plan went more melodic, but they're not going fully melodic. They're still retaining that mathy and aggressive edge.
Yeah, it's Dillinger in bursts. It's not a sustained thing.
It feels more hardcore to me. It's still mathy, but it's more hardcore-y, I think.
Yeah.
It's over before it really begins, that song, to be honest.
Forever Scum. I mean, I will say it has a really good, big, crushing melodic progression at the ending.
Yeah.
That makes that tune.
Totally. I think that's one of the things that people started to realise if you look back at the reviews as well, is that, there's now hooks in here. That's interesting because the first 3 EPs, which I guess would have been first people's blush with this band because the first record was released under a different name and then retroactively titled by The Armed, you would not have heard a hook. They're not. I mean, the hooks are kind of guitar based and they're kind of death and roll. They're not really poppy hooks like you get at the end of this song.
But that we spoke a lot about this when we covered Converge as well. It's one of the secrets of Converge is that they know when to do a big dramatic route change and reel you in emotionally. It's not just all combative, fucking loud, abrasive noise. There are moments where they throw in these big shifting, stirring kind of neoclassical style chord transitions, and that's the secret of why Converge are that much fucking better than their peers. And it feels like on this album at points they've really taken note of that.
It's almost like Kurt Blue might have been in the band.
It's almost like he was at least sitting in the control studio and be like, what if you just go down a fret?
I like the noisy breakdown. There's a noisy breakdown in it with feedback and guitars, and the bass has got that, like, if you've ever listened to Baptist, that bass tone is Baptist's. They're cancelled now, by the way, incidentally, just to let you know.
Reading too much Harry Potter?
Probably. But it's an interest, the noisy bit, like there's a bit noise rock tendencies that come in the next record, and then it kind of flows from that. Nerve Wrecker is fucking great, man.
Talking to Converge, there's like a poppier Converge feel,
totally.
and the vocals really remind me of the Bronx at points as well.
That's exactly it. I've actually got Every Time I Die as well, but they're kind of similar vocally, although Jordan has a much better voice than that from the Bronx, but I prefer Matt from the Bronx as well. I prefer the Bronx in general. I'm not a huge Every Time I Die fan, to be honest. Around 1 minute 56 it drops into like this open section, and the lead guitar tone sounds quite post-punky. and then it goes into just a mental guitar solo. I really love that song. It's really catchy and unrelentingly heavy at the same time. It does this thing you were saying that Converse do, like they give you a hook,
Yeah.
and they don't make the hook obvious, but it's there and you can't forget about it once you've heard it. It's always going to be the thing you come back to when you think about this record, you know.
Yeah, and I mean, we talked about it as well in Miss Machine. That's when Dillinger started wising up to. I mean, as we know, Calculating Infinity is my favourite Dillinger album, right? But that's because it's a fucking experience. Whereas Miss Machine, the reason that it connected with so many people was because they started putting in these dramatic shifts and bits of melody that accompanied the abrasiveness, and that was the perfect ratio, you know.
Yeah, totally.
Is it Rhythm O or Rhythm Zero?
Rhythm Zero, I think.
Rhythm Zero. So I mean, I like the chorus riff in that. It's got this really obstinate thing where they drop down to a low note repeatedly. That's quite a nice motif.
I like the lurching feel of the drums, which does remind me a lot of Converge. They do that often. When it slows down, that's very much my jam in this song.
And talking about Converge as well, drum stuff, Enemies Closer, that opening snare roll, and I think, to be honest, even the title of that song, Enemies Closer, it really reminds me of them big time.
Yeah, there's some breaks in this song which has got some really twisted guitar solos in it. It's like around about 140, you can hear it quite prominently actually. Sounds crazy in the mix. And there's towards the end there's some really nice bass runs as well, which I appreciate.
There's a couple of points in it where the bass does some the whole album where the bass really takes a little bit of a centre role. Blessings, I'm glad that this song's here because it gets us away from the Converge comparisons a bit. Really doomy and driving. It's got hints of stuff like Iron Monkey in it. Gives way to this fairly tuneful anti-solo section as well that sort of lightens the mood. And again, this is one of the ones that's got a couple of dead catchy bass parts on it.
It's got some gang chants in the chorus as well, which make it really catchy. That reminds me a bit in places of a band called Black Breath, who Death and Roll sort of thing. Kurt Blue produced as well, so it's all over. It
is the tone you want.
Dead Actress. Now this is when the armed become the armed. Really, they do shit like this.
Right, so well, first of all, it's a nice pacer for this album. It gives you a bit of breath, you know. That sort of sedate part of the song has a vibe. It's somewhere between, you know, really trippy slowcore, kind of dark, low stuff, maybe the band Tindersticks, and then the Axe to Fall stuff, the end of Axe to Fall, you know, that really melodramatic, heavy, slow stuff that they did. And you can very, very much hear that distinctive God City Studios feedback between the chops. It's like, it's almost like a sample. They start using it as a fucking message tone.
You should, man. I love the loungy part of it. It's synth bass. It's got some lovely, probably a synth pedal on a bass. Now that you've mentioned synth pedals earlier on, it's got some nice aching e-bowed guitars. It feels menacing in the way a Converge sort of interlude does, but these guys are always verge more on the jazzy, I think. I like that it's right in the middle of the record, like bang in the centre. Yeah,
you could have seen it as a final track, but it serves more of a purpose by giving you a little palate cleanser here. Polarizer, Bit Crushed Bontempi core I've got here. The bass synth effect, there's definitely bass synth in this one. It is a nice switch of texture. It's got that lengthy, weird dropout middle section. That was quite unexpected, and I'm not sure how satisfying it is musically, if I'm being honest, but I do think the concept, and I think the Nine Inch Nailsiness is texturally very interesting.
That's what I've said. It's like Nine Inch Nails but heavier. And Nine Inch Nails will often, especially when they're doing just mostly guitar-based stuff, they'll often verge towards glam in places, particularly with Teeth Eater, if you think about that. And I think this song has elements of that kind of Nine Inch Nails industrial glam thing going on. And then it's got dueling noisy guitar solos at the end, which I'm a fucking sucker for, man. Ender is just fucking vicious, man.
Raging extreme hardcore.
Yeah, it sounds like Converge and Botch having a fucking fight in a back alley, do you know what I mean?
I do think though that something that sets them apart from groups like Converge is that these songs that batter along at like 100 miles an hour could have been much shorter. So their fast songs tend to be quite long for their genre. As such, the relentlessness. When songs do that, it stops being quite so thrilling and can get a bit exhausting. So I think on Ender, it's good that they get round that by basically crushing the entire song up before the halfway point, and dropping down into this deathly oppressive doom
slow
piece.
section. Yeah, that's a good bit of the song, which has Converge in its approach. I think the sound of that slow section. There's some spooky keys towards the end. I don't know if that's a guitar pedal or, like you said, or actual synth, but it's a nice touch and it adds a cool texture to it, which Converge would never really do. They'd never really go to synthy sounds.
Yeah, it's not something they tend to do, although I've noticed that Kurt's using some slightly more 80s guitar processing these days. I think he uses this really fancy kind of Line 6 unit, and some of the stuff's very post-punk.
Yeah, the Helix maybe.
It's a lot of like Killing Joke style stuff going on in there.
No Risk.
No Risk, the 10th track. I really like the tonal guitar in that one.
It's good,
it's got an industrial air as a result. Bombastic, it's thunderous. I think it's one of the highlights of the record.
Yeah, it's got a big thumping outro as well, really dramatic, which brings it to a really nice close.
Issa Sharp, the 11th track. It's a weird deconstructed anti-rock thing. It's got a kind of glitchy piano. It's got like sound effects sort of skimming around the stereo image. There's a standalone throaty vocal accompanied just by a well, I suppose it can't be standalone if it's accompanied, but there's a throaty vocal that's accompanied by this gargantuan guitar passage, right? And it does make this song a lot more substantial for me than some of the other pieces. It feels distinct, and it feels less like a riff on other bands. It feels less open to comparisons with bands that we've already named half a dozen times here.
Yeah, that intro section reminds me of Scott Walker because it's the twisted and distorted pianos and creepy vocals.
His song finishes big as well.
Yeah, it does. That finisher is, I'm pretty sure that is an exact tone taken from Jane Doe. Guitar tone taken from Jane Doe. Paradise Day is almost poppy, that lead guitar riff. It feels like it's like quite melodic and nice, even though the song itself is not.
I mean, it tries to. It aspires to be melodic, let's put it that way. I like the changes in theory, but I'm not 100% sure that they got the arrangement right in it. This song I think kind of teeters on the brink of being something kind of brilliant, but doesn't quite fall down into it. I do like there's an offset kind of hard panned guitar in the right ear during the verse. It's really clever. And at the ending, the compounded nature of the layers of the instruments as they pile up, it reprises the earlier root changes. And I think at that point, the song really comes into its own. I just wish it had kind of got there in the earlier stages. I don't think the melodies hit as hard as they maybe could.
They bury the vocals towards the end as well, which I think is a really nice touch, and then that total Kurt Ballou signature.
Rage of Youth, 13th one, furious extreme hardcore. I think it's a product of what could be a much simpler band. I know this album is diverse, but this sounds like they're straight down the line kind of thing.
Feels like something from the first cut, the last 3 EPs.
Yeah. At points in the verse, there's a really, really good, sinister but melodic guitar that's fighting to be heard in the right of the stereo image, and I really wish that part had played a more central role, because it's the highlight of the song for me, but it's very buried.
The beatdown around 2 minutes 9 is just mean, really mean, and I love it. The bass tone is just total filth, man. Yeah, it's just a really heavy. It sounds like the Rage of Youth. It actually sounds like the Rage of Youth.
Final track, Dead Artist, which is basically just a glitchy conceptual outro tune. It does this kind of experimental electronica stuff. And then erupts with a final frenzy and a kind of strange mix to the sound. There's not really a lot to say about it. It's about 1 minute 40 or something like that, isn't it?
Just an outro, I think. But yeah, it's cool.
My conclusions? This entire band feels very much like the work of a marketer. Now, I don't mean that to be disparaging about the music, but I feel like there is a deliberate thought process woven through the entire thing. And that would typically make me a little bit suspicious. It wouldn't write it off for me, but it would make me a little bit on the defensive. It's a very capable, extreme experimental hardcore band. They work well as just that on this record, as just an experimental hardcore band. I think that's it fits them really well. And for a lot of people, I can see this album being the sweet spot before they got a little bit, I say ambitious, with an asterisk, ambitious in terms of like, maybe we can make it bigger, maybe we can reach out to new audiences, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I think it was a corrupting thing to the simple style they were doing, or a simpler style they were doing here. They're musically open-minded. I think with so many contributors involved, that was sort of inevitable. The fact that the band produced so many different sounds across just 5 albums, I think makes them an interesting case study. I'm not convinced that the sort of naked quality of all that material is incredibly high, but the ambition is there, and the ambition is commendable. And lastly, I do think their approach to release, the free release on Bandcamp thing, whilst the band did not lack in coverage, in part due to the collaborators and in part due to the whole kind of concept, the enigmatic thing, I do think that approach to release is independent enough to deserve applause. To give records away on Bandcamp when you've got people of the stature that they had is quite cool. It's a good band, and I reckon they probably have a killer playlist in them, if not a wall-to-wall killer album. But yeah, this is a good to very good record. And of their stuff, Yeah, the other stuff takes a bit more digesting, but I still think I probably like this the best.
Yeah, I think it is the sweet spot is right for me. I think it's their best overall piece of work. It doesn't try too hard to be experimental and different. It doesn't try too hard to widen the fan base, like you said.
It feels less Vice.
Yeah.
I'll be honest, it just feels less Vice magazine to me.
Yeah. They are even though they're in Sargent House, they still remain a very DIY band. I think everything is all done in house, by them. I don't think they've got a PR person. They've probably got an agent that books or tours, but
They definitely have an agent.
that would make sense, I guess, at a certain level. And then we'll have a manager, but they're very much like it's all done by us. We don't, like I said, their singer is a director of music videos and stuff like that. They're very capable as people would appear, and I like that aspect of it. I like the DIY nature of it. I like they're still very DIY and they're playing with being bigger.
I mean, it's easier to be DIY when you're incredibly well connected.
Yeah,
Let's put it
totally,
that way.
100%.
But good on them anyway.
But yes, I think it's the best record. I think it's the best, most succinct statement, even if their statement changes from album to album.
So what this does is brings us to the Nexus part of the show. The Nexus, which we forgot to draw out the pot last week, I believe. So we had to improvise a little bit, and we thought, who's been in the news this week? And we ruled out Elon Musk because fuck off. So weirdly,
We picked somebody worse.
No, weirdly enough, we rejected Elon Musk in favour of Evgeny Prigozhin.
Prigozhin, yeah. Prigozhin.
So yeah, Nexus time.
A complicated series of connections between different things.
Yeah, so...
Well, hang on. Quick recap. Listeners, the Nexus, we have a name, in this case Prigozhin, and via a series of jumps, we try to connect it to the band of that week, or actually we do it in reverse of that, but you'll get the idea. Mark chose this week's album, ergo Mark goes first.
So, Tony Hawk is a fan of the band, confirmed. He may very well have been the ghillie suit man in the video for featuring Frank Turner. Quick sidebar here, but you did bring up the song featuring Frank Turner, but you didn't get a chance to tell the story of the song.
I was actually going to.
Which is fucking brilliant.
Yeah.
So please tell that story before we continue.
Okay, so featuring Frank Turner came out and it had a bunch of uncleared samples on it. And then it turned out they'd somehow got hold of a recording of Frank Turner demoing a new song from 8 years prior
They did in God City Studios.
that he had absolutely not authorised. And basically they featured it on the record. And then Frank Turner tried to reach out to get in touch with them because he was like, I love the band. I would have agreed to them doing it, but I'm not comfortable with the fact that they didn't ask me. And so featuring Frank Turner does in fact feature Frank Turner against his wishes and on the cover. And
No, that's not him in the cover. That's Frank Carter from Gallows.
is it?
And Pure Love. And
fuck
Frank
me.
Carter House Nights because it's this pure.
That's an extra level of trolling. Then.
Yeah, totally. And apparently, when they were approached to talk about it, a lot of their responses were around the lines of, "Oh, we're really confused as to how this happened. We're saddened to hear that Frank doesn't approve of our use of his samples. We were huge fans of the band Gallows." Which is just brilliant patter. Anyway, Tony Hawk, he has confirmed he's a fan of the band. He's posted about it on his social media. He may very well be the ghillie suit guy, and probably not in every single. They toured with a ghillie suit guy. He probably wasn't Tony Hawk. Can you imagine Tony Hawk slam dancing and talking pint in Glasgow? Like, brilliant, but no. So he does like the band. Some have even stated that he may very well have been in the band at some point. Don't know if that's true.
Seems a stretch.
People have also said Andrew WK might be in the band at some point. So
He might.
yeah. But he was involved in some capacity in the video for featuring Frank Turner, it is believed.
Yeah.
In 1998, Tony Hawk was approached by Activision, who wanted to make a skateboarding game with him as the star. He agreed to work with them, and then they hired Neversoft, who were a small studio that had previously made games like Apocalypse, which is a really, really terrible game which starred Bruce Willis, and Spider-Man. to develop the game. Tony Hawk was heavily involved in the development process, giving feedback on the gameplay, the level design, the soundtrack, the skaters that would appear in the game. He also did motion capture for his own tricks, recorded voice lines for the game, and he wanted the game to be so realistic but also fun and accessible for everyone to play. The first game was a huge success, came out in 1999, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. It received critical acclaim, and then it generated numerous spin-offs well into the 2000s and the 2010s. The last game in the series was Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5, which is not a sequel to Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4, which I'm going to get to in a little second. But it was widely panned by critics for poor graphics, buggy performance, and lack of content. In 2020, they re-released the remastered Pro Skater 1 and 2, and they are bloody sublime, if I do say so myself. The fifth game in the series, which was supposed to be Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5, was actually a game called Tony Hawk's Underground. And in Tony Hawk's Underground, there is a level in Moscow. You can see where we're going already. Apart from being blown out of the sky by the Russian gangster Vladimir Putin en route to Moscow from his home in St. Petersburg for revenge for attempting a coup, Prigozhin has been involved in all number of nefarious activities. I could have just ended there and said, he was going to Moscow, therefore next is complete. But I've got an even more annoying, sad and horrible story. So one of the things that he made a lot of money from doing was being personally involved in or affiliated with 6 companies that provided food to all Russian schools.
Well, Yevgeny Prigozhin was known as Putin's chef up until the point where he started, well, even after he co-founded the Wagner military group. He was in jail for a long time.
He was for 12
and then
years.
he had a fucking hot dog cart, and then went from having a hot dog cart to making dinner for literally like Putin and George Bush. He fed them at one of the state dinners.
That's totally right, yeah.
So I had quite a meteoric rise.
So it is alleged that he made over $2 billion from that, shall we say conglomerate, or shall we say mafioso-like arrangement?
I was going to say, you're implying
control.
Some level of like oversight and official.
For his mafioso-like control over the fucking school meals in Russia. And he started that in 2011. How is that nefarious, I hear you ask? Well, the next part is fairly bogging.
Yeah, unleash it.
Alexei Navalny. Is it Navalny? Navalny. He alleged that Prigozhin was linked to a company called Moscow? No.
You hate names.
I hate name. Moskovy Shvolnik, which means Moscow schoolboy, which is the company that had supplied poor quality food to Moscow schools, which had caused an outbreak of dysentery in 2019. 127 children died from the school which was affected. The school was called School Number 1375. Great name for a school.
Proper Soviet style.
Yeah. And that was in Moscow, and they actually attempted to sue Prigozhin afterwards, but it didn't
Prigozhin.
get very far. Prigozhin, yeah. But so yeah.
The Moscow schools thing. There was a whole bunch of incidents to do with the quality of the food that was being sent out. It's because you got a mafia. You gut it. Out of 100% of product, 40% of it gets kicked up to the various capos, and then what you're left with is a very, very much smaller amount of money to do the task you were originally meant to do. Therefore, you have to cut corners. That, by the way, is why Russian aircraft can't fly in Europe, because the same system applies. All the safety checks and stuff, the money that's set aside for them is not spent on what it's meant to be spent on. It's only a fraction of it that gets spent on what it's meant to be spent on, and therefore they're not allowed those craft into a lot of European airspace. There's only a couple of countries that allow Russian flights. You have to get a connecting flight as a result.
He also was responsible for supplying the food to the Russian army in the current war.
Yep.
Which is all rotten and horrible.
The Russian army that's starving to death in the trenches.
Because the food was inedible.
So,
I'm sure that's part of the reason, right?
Yeah, I mean, an interesting thing, it doesn't actually come up in this, but I just wanted to mention it because obviously Yevgeny Prigozhin is famous for many things, but recently it's been the founder or the head of the Wagner military group. But the Wagner military group wasn't named by Yevgeny Prigozhin, it was named by a guy called Dmitry Utkin. And Dmitry Utkin...
Who died also on that plane.
Died on that plane
Massive
as well.
Neo-Nazi.
Dmitry, yeah, exactly. So Dmitry Utkin, his code name, his self-appointed code name was Wagner because he was such a big fan of Wagnerian music. And as you mentioned there, he was a fucking raging neo-Nazi. What I think is really fascinating is that clearly, obviously, everybody remembers, and a lot of people still echo this and amplify it, that the reason Russia was attacking Ukraine was because Ukraine was a neo-Nazi regime run by neo-Nazis, and yes, you know, there's areas of, especially in the east of Ukraine, that has a real far-right problem. No worse than Russia, but it has a real far-right problem. There's a very, very famous, is it called Asgard Fry? Like metal festival that is literally just fucking far-right bands all the time. But yeah, I mean, there's an element, there's a kernel of truth to it, but it's a very fucking tiny
kernel. Is it the
kernel.
Azov regiment? That's
the Azov battalion, yeah. That started
one.
with some really strong far-right links. It's much less so now, but there's always a kernel of truth. And, you know, like Putin loves that, a kernel of truth, so it can't be totally...
That's all he needs.
Yeah, you know, because they don't deal in nuance. But what is fascinating is that the Wagner army was named Wagner by a neo-Nazi, and the guy that's I think he's called the head of military operations, Dmitry Utkin, or he was covered in tattoos, including like SS insignia. He wore SS caps and stuff, and yet they still had the audacity to try and push through this fucking lie that the reason they were making a land grab in Ukraine was to combat neo-Nazis. So they were sending in their own neo-Nazis, and Putin's already said that he paid Wagner billions
Of course he did.
to do what it was doing.
Of course he did.
Paying neo-Nazis billions to go into other countries. So, I mean, just I wanted to make sure that that's public knowledge the next time some fucking idiot tells you, oh, but fucking they're in there fighting the Nazis, right? Just bring that into play.
Yeah, I mean, calling it a mafioso regime is the most accurate way of describing describing the Russian regime, you know.
So my Nexus, The Armed, we've already mentioned, featuring Frank Turner and the Stolen Samples. Frank Turner was a member of the band Million Dead, and they also featured Julia, who's in Future to the Left. I think it's Andy's wife. Yeah. So Million Dead toured with Alec Empire of Atari Teenage Riot. Alec Empire and Atari Teenage Riot, I'm sure you know them, you know, like, I don't fucking know what we call them now, like GABA anarchist hardcore or whatever the fuck.
Digital hardcore is what they were called, right?
What they went with the album title, wasn't it? So they played shows at various hacker conferences. They did Alec Empire did a 24-hour live Q&A with people from Anonymous. He also did an interview with a member of Anonymous. I think it was for Wired. Atari Teenage Riot, the track Jimmy, or J1M1, from their, I think the album's called Reset. That's about Julian Assange and Edward Snowden. And also Atari Teenage Riot have a song called Black Flags, and the video for Black Flags was released to kind of promote fundraising for WikiLeaks in 2011, 2012, around about then. WikiLeaks and Julian Assange were a favourite subject of the Russian bots online, amplifying pro-Trump and pro-Brexit stuff for fucking ages, and Assange was a key feature of that. Julian Assange, by the way, was also given a show on RT before most people in the West seemed to fucking want to admit what RT actually was, which was a Russian state-sponsored propaganda channel. Alex Salmond also had a show in that. That's good, eh? And actually, I bet you any money Frankie Boyle wants to forget that he was on RT a number of times. But
I was going to say, do you think that Edward Snowden regrets living in Russia, going to Russia now?
It's probably not a coincidence that he ended up there. I think
that obviously it was a political thing at the time, but I think he might actually regret the choice of being there at this moment in time.
They knew what good propaganda that was going to be for them, and we collectively didn't really want to acknowledge what the fuck Russia has actually obviously been for a long time. Anyway, so WikiLeaks and Assange, as I said, Assange on RT, the main bot farm, which spent a lot of its time amplifying content like Julian Assange and WikiLeaks and stuff, that was based in St. Petersburg in Russia and was known as the Internet Research Agency. That Internet Research Agency was set up and run by Yevgeny Prigozhin as one of his many, many, many enterprises.
The same organisation that was responsible for election interference in America.
Yep, absolutely.
Which Prigozhin was wanted for by the FBI up until his death.
The one that put out the Hillary Clinton and Benghazi stuff and
Pizzagate and all that.
Yeah, and then Assange decided to drop that stuff at a very, very key time in the US election to help Donald Trump. Podesta emails, all that shit. So yeah, it's all connected. There you go. That was The Armed. Mark, we'll do one final teaser, or will we just tell them what we're going to do next week?
I think you should just tell them.
Right. We are going to cover a very, very, very obscure underground band from the northwest of America called Nirvana. and we are going to cover the album Incesticide. It's a controversial choice just because it's not because they're so fucking huge.
Yeah.
Because you will hear them on Radio 1. But no, we're going to cover Nirvana, and we're going to look at Nirvana through the alternative lens that I always felt is most appropriate to them, because a lot of alternative bands have got big, and they've kind of got big by design, and it's always ultimately kind of suited them. And Nirvana continued to me to be the band that it just really doesn't make sense that they became as big as they were, but the cultural significance of that was just fucking enormous. And I think Incesticide is a particularly interesting lens through which to examine them, because coming after Nevermind but before In Utero, it was a stopgap. It was like, this is the biggest band in the world right now, we need to put something else out there quickly. But as we all know, they had their demons, couldn't record in time, so Incesticide appeared as this massive fucking opportunistic sort of, let's keep the fans interested. And there we have it. It's a very, very odd record, all mishmashed and slapped together with lots of
B-side compilation.
Yeah, well, kind of, yeah. There's lots of different drummers on there and loads of things to talk about. So we'll talk about Incesticide, and we will clearly detour into the legacy of Nirvana and some other aspects. We're also going to have little voice messages from a lot of the co-hosts on their particular favourite moments of Nirvana and any observations. It'll be an interesting one. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this one. Plenty to say.
Should be fun.
So join us next week for that. Mark will be working on his pronunciation of names. Good luck with Chris
Novoselic.
Novoselic. You decided?
One of them.
Oh, see, we'll maybe go for all of them.
Yeah, we'll try them all out. Whatever sits right.
We'll just cycle through them.
Yeah.
Right.
Dave, is that Dave Grohl?
Yeah, I was thinking that we bring back the Grohl Nexus for 1 week.
We should. We have to. We must.
Easiest ever.
Yeah.
Can you connect Dave Grohl to Nirvana?
I don't know, man.
Not anymore. Anyway, see you then.
Bye.